First words.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, the Red Room, Blue Room, Your Honor, I guess that would be me. Thank you guys so much for coming in. Conversation that we are having and debate is whether objective morality can exist independent of a God or religion, and the answer to that is no. Very simply put, the understanding of what morality is subscribed to whether something is good or bad. And the problem that we run into with this is it would be dependent on the individual's taste, which means that it would be relative. Even if it's left up to the state, the problem is that most of the state agreeing that something is good would not entail that we would agree with this. If I bring the way that our criminal justice system has ran, or for example, slavery into the equation, most of our society said that these things were good. And unfortunately, in today's time, most of our people would say that that's absolutely wrong. Objectively, slavery would be a wrong thing. So we wouldn't be able to index this back to the 1850s to say that what was taking place in Southern America was good or objectively good at the time, because most of our society agreed with it. And with that being said, if it is based off of the perspective of individuals and most of that society being the case, then the question becomes, with that minorities a perspective have any, or within minorities perspective, have any type of argument to be made on whether their morality that they are giving is an objective truth that we should be subscribing to. And I'll be bringing that example in here as well. Without there being a God that defines the morality that humans should be interacting with each other with, there would be no such thing as objective morality. Please excuse me because I just got my teeth done as well. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much. Let me reset the time. All right, officer, I'll start the time on your first words.
Everybody in the room today, welcome. I'm here to prove that you can have objective morality without a God. I will demonstrate that having a God is nothing more than begging the question and creating circular arguments. I will demonstrate not only with mathematics, but also with good core fundamental analogies to the concept itself, with other supporting concepts that we have arrived in our world across time, history, and geography on what a common, what we would call universal law for this concept, the laws of all people that dictate actions or principles, what we will call maxims, for those of you who are curious in the conversation, how this has really been a constant throughout our societies, before religion, during religion, divorced of religion, societies that have never been touched by religion. And I will demonstrate to my opponent today at least one thing. You can beg to your God for a type of foundation for your worldview, but you're simply doing it as a middleman, and it does not require so to have a good moral life. Thank you.
All right, let me reset the time. All right, and your 20 minutes will start as soon as one of you speaks.
I'll open up since I told Tbone I'm going to take the aggressive position of convincing him. Tbone, are you familiar with the convergence argument?
No.
So the convergence argument is this. I'm going to give you the analogy, okay? Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Two cultures that have never met both conclude triangles have 180 degrees, which is a fact, by the way. We don't say that geometry is relative or culturally constructed. The same logic would apply to basic moral truths. So on convergence, I would say that you can take two societies that have never interacted with each other. This is actually very true. I will point towards 18th century Muslims and Europeans before they had major cultural mixes, both actually, I go back further than that, 13th century, during the time of the Anglos and the Saxons, before they mixed. Schmurder was wrong, not because God willed it, but because societies constructed themselves to make things like Schmurder wrong. And even across the world,
Can you pause the timer?
sorry,
Absolutely.
across the world where they had different realities, different histories, and different cultures, it was also wrong there too. So the convergence theory is that regardless of where you're coming from, who your God is, or what your society is constructed of, because also societies without God have had this as well, there are certain basic human truths that have been existent. Stealing from people is wrong. The grape of women is wrong. The schmurder of your fellow neighbor for no reason wrong. And many societies have actually held this. And even societies that haven't held it, like religious ones that you will get into, I'm sure, they've had debates amongst themselves about what their philosophers meant because it is such a moral truth that these things can be wrong.
Okay. So a couple of issues that we have here. Number one is that with two societies agreeing to the same thing does not make it objectively a truth statement. And this is because at one point in time, over in Australia, over in the UK, and over in America, slavery was something that was permissible. This was something that we allowed to happen. So just because two different societies are allowing for this said thing to happen, even if there's overlap, would not entail that that would be a truth claim that we could make of something being objectively a good thing. What I would argue is that the reason that you see this, even dating back to pre-biblical times, is because it produces the best outcome for a society. Whenever you have individuals that are regulated and being able to take the life of other individuals, you don't have mass graves that are being produced, and society is able to reproduce and repopulate over the course of time. Right? If we allow for schmurdering to happen, that does not happen. As it pertains to the aggressive natures of individuals going and stealing from other individuals, raping other individuals, that does not progress a society. So my rebuttal to what you're saying is that this wouldn't necessarily mean that there's an objective truth. It just means that societies, which I think this could technically be a truth, have certain parameters that they put in place for societies to produce the best outcomes for the longevity of that society.
Yeah, I would say that things like slavery are just a classification error. This was universal throughout the world because certain people, like criminals or different race of people, were classified as no longer people. But that was still a convergence that was corrected by historical shifts. If it wasn't, we would have slavery today,
Wait, so
and we would not
my
trying to
my
fight slavery in
question
other
then
parts of the
becomes,
world
if
today.
this was an objective truth, right? Whether it was categorical or not, doesn't matter, right? If it was an objective truth, why did we have slavery in the 1850s?
Because those people failed to recategorize different people into Urs to man. But what we don't have is, again, because what you'd be having to say to me is that slavery would be okay, because we do have slavery in the Bible, for example. We do have certain religions that believe that enslaving people or raping women or beating women would be acceptable. And what we don't have is convergences on that. What we have actually are separations from that on different religions, on different non-secular communities that completely reject that as a whole. But we don't have, and I'm going to keep using slavery, is through the 18th century into the 19th, 20th, 21st, 22nd century, what we've had is stronger stances against the subjugation of people. And I want to point out one more thing, and I'm going to land here. Even when there were slaves, the categorical error is supported by the fact that those common societies still had laws that believed that people ought to have free will. Now, if whether or not you're going to categorize people that way or not, that would be an error of government and an error of man. But we can still converge as we did throughout history and correct those errors.
So I believe that this becomes harder for you because based off of what the Bible says, if we're bringing back that there was slavery in the Bible, we know what God's words were, right? And it was that we were all created in the image of God and that we are all equal under God, right? For you, as it pertains to categorizing those, and just to be clear, they're still humans, right? But even after slavery, when they were counted as humans, there was still discrimination towards those individuals, which we would say is objectively wrong. So even if you're categorizing those individuals as humans, does not entail that you believe that they have the same value. And the only reason why this is the case, or why people were permitted to be able to do this, was based off of the government. My question becomes, why is it that nobody, and not enough, I'm not going to say nobody, that not enough people during that point in time had this grasp on this objective morality of enslaving individuals or discriminating against these individuals based off of them being human, but just
Mm.
being a different category of a human, so to speak?
Well, I would say this actually becomes harder for you because those societies were constructed under the belief of a God. So, for example, a lot of those societies were Old Testament, believing in Leviticus 25:44 through 46. The Torah outlines rules for purchasing foreign slaves as permanent property and passing them down as inheritance. You even have New Testament, Ephesus, I believe it is, 6:5, where the Apostle Paul frequently references and instructs slaves that he calls by different names to obey their masters, and that there could be, but possibly would not be, the freeing of the bondage. So it becomes harder for you when I say that we have convergence, where your societies were constructed by God, which would mean that slavery was not a wrong, and we should still have it today. I would hope you would agree if that's your position. I'm saying that we saw as humans the indignity that slavery brought, and we divorced ourselves from God to the point where even today theologians argue that these weren't the words of the Old or New Testaments, to divorce themselves of that ugly reality that God gave commands that man interpreted that were wrong, because convergences throughout the world told us it was wrong to deny people their basic human dignities. No.
No. Because, and again, when I go back into the Bible, that phrase of us all being equal under God does not mean that there were not individuals that were going against God's words. And sometimes we can look at verbiage knowing that they were going against God. Leviticus is a prime example, that being a society within the Bible. And that society had to write up certain scriptures, had certain scriptures that were writ up and laws for that society because of how bad that society was doing. And so certain laws were put in place to try to mitigate that from happening. It doesn't matter, because all of what was happening within that society, or at least most of what was happening within that society, went against God's original law. And so what I'm saying is we can always bring this back to the words of God and know that God said this, and you are going against what that is. When it comes to a government, when it comes to an individual, you have to be able to ground this somehow, right? You can't bring this back to, well, I just said, right? Because if you say, and I'll give you a prime example, I value human nature, right? I think that things should go the way that they're going to go, right? There's going to be a flood that comes in play here. If we allow this flood to happen, 100 people are going to die and 50 cows are going to die. We can intercept this flood from happening, right? This would be the position that you would take. I would say, no, I don't think that that's a good thing. I think that we should stop as human beings intercepting the course of what human nature is doing and allow for these things to happen. We don't want for whatever is going to take place in the forest to happen based off of us intercepting this. The question becomes, who is right based off of the two statements that we're making? Should we save those 100 people and those 50 cows? Or should we allow for those people and those animals to die based off of not intercepting human nature's course of actions?
Before I answer that, would you also then concede very quickly that if Schmittler had argued that the annihilation of the Jews was acceptable by God, you would have been okay with World War II?
Not with World War II, but
It'd
if
have been
God, hold on,
evil to prevent it, right?
if God would have commanded that, then it would have been a good by God. Yes.
But would it be good by man?
No, not good by man.
Okay. Because this is where I say I think that the middleman smuggle here is God. You're going to rest your opinions on, well, I don't have a duty to intervene. I don't have a duty to produce any fundamental moralities within myself or my society, because I can just fall back in the word of God, which is good and it's good because it is God, which makes it good because God said it's good. I'm saying we are beyond that now. Now we have, because you asked me, what would I do justify? Well, I would justify my society based on sciences. We have the ability to have reasoning and science and the ability to study outcomes. So, for example, even before modern day, primitive times, we knew that murder or things like theft were wrong, not because God said so or I said so, but because of the societal impact it had on our actual communities. And as we've ventured more into the modern era, we can now see, we now have more words, more language through epistemology, more knowledge to understand what happens when society would condone raping women, to condone murder without any consequence, not in self-defense, but just beating your neighbor with a coconut because you can, right? This would be what I would call the scientific outcome, which is different than the religious outcome, which still gives validity to my society. I don't have to rest in a Bible, something I can't prove, by the way, which is God.
No, but there's no consistency within that is the problem. And you talked about the outcomes of the society. I could just bring to you a scenario where we enslave Black individuals for the best economic outcome within America. If in the
What
long run, if that produces the best outcomes for the American people, then enslaving black people under what you believe the outcome to be is greater, that would be justified.
it's not what I believe it to be. It's epistemologically what it would be. We know that during slavery, that outcome actually was detrimental to the American machine. America's progress largely improved militarily, economically, scientifically through inventions because of the release of black people from bondage. So even with collective knowledge, without an actual study, we know that that would not be true.
So I'm sorry, just to be clear, that is not true. America would not be where it is today if slavery did not happen. But the question that I'm going to pose to you is, if enslaving black people, it's the same thing with the Jew thing that you gave me. If enslaving black individuals would have produced for the best outcome for America, not just economically, but sociology, you name it, right? If it produces for the best outcome, then ought we go with that decision? And is that a moral, objective fact that it is a good thing for us to do because it produces the best outcomes?
Even if I was to grant and concede that it would have a great, let's just say it had the absolute best economic boon to the country in our entire history, no,
Mhm.
because the detriment to rights that would occur to our citizen and the violence that would ensue would destroy the fabric of this country, i.e., the Civil War. It annihilated our country to fight. Even they have other reasons why they fought it, but to smuggle it in, they fought according to them on some behalf of rights about the enslaved people. And so the argument would be that you cannot replace my citizen, their autonomy, their rights, and the fabric of my society with high GDP growth. That doesn't suffice.
But based on who? Now I'm getting confused because it's not based
Based
off
on
of the outcome.
epistemology.
Now it's indexed back to the human rights violations. And then my question becomes, who sets the standard for what those human rights violations are and whether we grant them or not?
Where do you think rights come from?
I think that they come from God.
They come from nature. They are universal law inherent to the person. If you put me
If
on an
that was the
island,
case, then we wouldn't have individuals that would have been violating those rights. People did not subscribe to those rights, and those rights would
no,
have been defined differently within each society. Right? We're,
no, that's
we're
not.
living in a time now where property is a right. That was not always the case back in the day.
Well, that's not true. You can have a violator of rights while also holding that people had rights. I mean, did slaves have rights?
No, I don't think slaves had rights.
So rights are not inherent to man through universe law or through universe or nature,
No, okay. If you're asking me whether I think that they had rights as it pertains to their God-given rights, absolutely, not
and they
through
were
nature,
and they were
but
violated by who?
those God-given rights were violated through the government.
Okay, but then the government would be man's. Okay, so this is what I'm saying to
Yes.
you then. Right, so this is what I'm saying to you is you can have rights that can be violated by man. It doesn't divorce you of your rights. Now, we can have a conversation where rights come from. I would say that rights, using island theory, if you put me on an island, what are my rights? Well, I can walk and I can talk. Those aren't God given. Those are because I'm existing in my world around me. God is just the middleman for what you believe your rights are, but really the rights are inherent. Because if you believe that the rights come from God, similar to a man who believes rights come from government, then you would have to look me in my face and tell me that there is nothing wrong with slavery. Because God at one point was interpreted by man, and it's all it is, because God is in my opinion, a nothing burger. He doesn't exist. So man is interpreting a book and enslaving man. But we would both agree that slavery is wrong. So how can you rationalize that contradiction while also simultaneously defending God as the asserter of morality?
Just because you're reading something in the Bible does not necessarily mean that God permitted that, right? We know what Ramesses did in Egypt. That was not permitted by God, right? It is just giving you the story. And so because slavery is explained in the Bible does not mean that God permits that. I already went back and told you that he created us in the image of him. So with that being said, we have to move past that point.
Has anybody ever met
And
God?
I do have another question for you, because when that scenario of the island comes into play, if another person is dropped on that island with you, you have an obligation to not murder that individual, correct?
Yes.
Okay, where does that obligation come from if it is not God?
Rationale and reasoning. It would be impossible to facilitate a just or safe society if everybody can murder each other with impunity. I have a question for you
But
though
where does
before
rationale and reasoning come from?
it comes from two agents engaging with each other and facilitating those rights because we have deleterious effects that we can see on our society.
Right. So
Epistemology.
have the same reasoning and the same rationale and does not want to subscribe to that contract, right? That verbal contract that you all have of not murdering each other. And he wants to do so because he wants in, or would it exist independent of a God or religion? And so it just to be clear, if you want to reject Christianity within this, that's fine. I use that within an example, but we don't have to do that. We can take Buddhism. We can take whatever one that you
All
want
of
to use.
them.
The fact being, yeah, that's fine. The fact is that if there is not a God, right? If you want to reject Christianity because of that, that's fine. You just have no basis for saying that this morality is objective. You can't. But as I just brought to you within the scenario, the only thing you said was, well, this guy isn't a reasonable actor and he shouldn't be able to come in and ruin the fabric of a society. That's perfectly fine. It doesn't matter because there's nothing that you're grounding to say, well, this individual is absolutely wrong and I am absolutely right. The
Well,
only
to
thing you're
be
saying is that he's going to mess up the fabric of society. Who cares? What does that mean?
to be clear, my mission was to set out to prove that you can have morality without having a God, and convergence theory proves that not only through
No,
mathematics,
but
arriving at different
objective
conclusions.
morality.
It is objective. If different societies across the world, regardless of their religion or not, are agreeing that murder is wrong, then where does it become objective for you? Because for me, it's whenever those societies all agree.
It's never objective. That would be a subjective statement based off of those societies who have a similar taste in moving their societies forward and allowing for the progression of their societies to take place. It
Do you
doesn't
think
mean that
that?
it's objective.
Do you think it's natural to want to progress a society, though?
I think
Like
it's
who wants to
natural.
regress?
I
Okay.
think it's natural. That doesn't entail that it's an objectively right thing to do.
If the hold on, if the society is agreeing that murder would be destructive to their reality, and multiple societies agree on that, it would be objective. It would be a common understanding through epistemology and knowledge.
No.
That's what creates the moral duty.
No, where are these duties coming from?
The
Time.
rational the
Time.
you're lucky.
All right. So officer is going to do closing statement first because
Yeah.
T-Bone started on opening, and I'll start whenever you're ready.
People of the room and my very intelligent opponent Tbone, thank you for debating with me today. I hope everybody can agree to one thing. Not only did Tbone fail to demonstrate how God is objective, because conceded that God's never been seen by a man, only heard by a man, if we assume that's who God was, and that to err is man, so man could be wrong in the interpretations. But T-Bones also had to concede to me that convergences across realities have occurred. My simple conclusion is, where does rights begin? We're born with them. Where do duties begin? Through rational actors coming to conclusions about what progresses society, as T-Bone admitted to me, is a natural phenomena for humans, is to progress their society, or at the very least, I'd give him maintain. So I would say that I have proven my case. You can have an objective reality without a God, because you can have rational agents that are coming together and formulating laws, rules, or what we'll call duties and rights, divorced of a book, which is my only claim today, which I do believe I have sufficiently shown. Thank you.
Thank you so much, officer. Let me reset the time. All right, T-Bone, I'm ready when you are.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Red Room, Blue Room, Your Honor, Toodles, and everybody who came, thank you guys so much. I think that I've done a great job in displaying that without any type of God or any type of religion, that this type of morality that we want to display is based off of what we would deem to be a good thing based off of humans and based off of other humans having different perspectives of what is good and what is bad would just be relative. It would be to our own personal opinions and what we think is the best thing. Just because there is a collective understanding of what would be a good thing for our society or how we should be progressing as a society does not entail that that would be the moral truth. I've displayed this with the examples of slavery. I've explained this as it pertains to the scenario that I gave of the individuals who would be unalived and the cows that would be unalived. The other portion that I want to hit with on this is just because it is a natural tendency within us does not also mean that it's a good thing. As men, people would argue that we have a natural tendency at one point in time throughout our stage of development in wanting to have sexual relations. That does not then mean that we go and commit human rights violations against other individuals so that we can get off our seat. Right? Just because it is natural does not mean that certain human rights violations take place. And so we have to index this back to something. It can't be through nature. It can't be through societies. It can't be through law, because we've known all of these to crumble at the core. We have had individuals that have been wrong. We have had societies that have been wrong. We have had governments and laws that have been written up that we have assessed to be absolutely wrong in the way that they've displayed in actions throughout our the course of time. And so with that being said, unless you have a God, an entity outside of being a human being to be able to draw up what is right and wrong for us to be able to subscribe to, you cannot have objective morality outside of it.
Time. Thank you. Everybody, thank you so much for coming to this debate. I don't have mod power. Someone